This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis kicks off today's show. Elliott explains recent market movements and the impact of trade changes. Jeff Whitworth, K-State crop entomologist, continues the show by discussing what pests he has recently been getting calls about. He talks about the Army cutworm and alfalfa weevil. Concluding the show is K-State fisheries and aquatics extension specialist Joe Gerken with information about algae, which is commonly referred to as pond moss, and how people could manage it. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Elliott, first talking on the cash side of things, and what are we seeing?
Yeah, really, when we talk about the cash side on the feeder cattle side, most regional markets are up, both on the lighter weights, so 5-6 weights, and on more of the yearling side. So when we're thinking about kind of where we were at Nebraska, it's really been kind of middling, generally in kind of that 392 range, 385 to 382 for the 5-6 weights, and for the 7-8 weights, we've really been in kind of that 310 range, dollars per hundredweight. This is still pretty considerable, $20 to $30 above where we were last year. And if we look at it where we're at over the 5-year average, 2019 to 2023, we're at 160. And so much higher than we were in the past.
What are we seeing for futures?
Yeah, really the futures were kind of building throughout the week. And then, of course, we had the large announcements about tariffs, and that's really kind of taken a hit. Closing on Friday, most markets, most contracts were down about $6 a hundredweight. Huge discounts off there. I think some of that is kind of anticipatory about like what is actually going to happen in the market. I think there was a lot of pressure on the fed cattle side, pushing prices up. I think this is one of those ways it's just kind of relieving some of that pressure. And when we think about, tariffs, it has the potential to limit total demand going out our back door. And so more of that product's going to stay in the domestic market potentially. And so, there is some justification for those discounts, but, pretty wide discounts across the board.
Are we still feeling any strength in the market then when we look at futures?
I'd say it's down, middling to down. And it's primarily because I think people are trying to sort out, what are the effects, what products are covered, what products are going to be affected.
And you mentioned trade, Elliott, and what's been happening with trade?
Yeah, obviously we had the large announcement with the Trump tariff measures. And so those were really what he called reciprocal measures. And really where he was coming at this was the total value of our goods that are leaving the country versus the total value of goods that are coming into the country. And really what we started to see is that we have what he would call trade deficits, in the sense we're importing a lot more than we're exporting. So we're providing markets for other places to get high value goods, and we're not able to access those markets. Some of that has to do with historical. When we talk about rebuilding Europe, we were basically said, yes, tax our goods coming in to provide income flowing. But the problem is a lot of those haven't changed, in decades. And so there was kind of this decrease in the total taxation, but really Trump was more attacking a lot of the non-tariff measures that really put in place. Think of like tariff weight quotas, like we're only going to accept so many pounds of your beef into a country. Tariff rate quotas that we have for beef are in Europe, for example. People would love to eat our beef in Europe, but it's artificially restricted. And then the other big form of tariff measure is what we call sanitary and phytosanitary, or SPS conditions. And these are things, think of like residue limits for different products that we use for different species. Each country can either choose to set them themselves based upon science, or they can choose to follow the international standard, which is Codex Alimentarius. And some of the work that I have been doing is really showing that countries are somewhat protectionist when we talk about setting residue limits. And what that would generally mean is that they set stricter residue limit requirements than what they actually have for their own countries. And so beef coming in has to meet a higher requirement than their own countries. And this is somewhat different than what we see in kind of the crop side. So there are real non-tariff measures out there that are impeding trade and value of our products to go overseas. And I think this is one of those ways that the administration has shown, not only in their first term, but now in their second term, of saying, hey, this is how we're going to get done. And really, if you follow Trump beforehand, the really phrase is money talks, and we're going to follow the money.
So as we're talking historically, when we look at the executive branch for the United States of America, did things happen between that first term and second term, or is this him reciprocating things from his first term or just adding on?
I think this is a continuation for policies and a way of operating and doing business with the world that he really had in his first term. And really, when we think about, a lot of the things that happened, we entered that trade war with China and our other trading partners in the first term. But what was kind of the result of that was that China actually started coming to the table and buying U.S. beef. Any chart that you'll see that shows that really prior to 2018, no beef entered directly through the front door of China. It might have been going through gray markets like through Vietnam or through Hong Kong, but it wasn't actually going directly into China. And since, that 2018, 2019 era, we've seen China become basically a zero trading partner for beef to our second or third largest trading partner in the world. So competing with people like Japan and South Korea. And so the fact that, that did work, that was as a way of getting in there. And when we talk about building, demand, once people have had a taste of the U.S. beef, normally it's hard to go back from that. Consumers are usually pretty satisfied with it and keep demanding it. And so when I think about kind of where this administration goes and how it affects the beef industry, I would say it is going to impact potentially a little bit, because we are taxing, Japan and South Korea, our two largest trading partners. However, Mexico and Canada were taken off that, and that pretty much sums up our top 6 trading partners. And so that, along with kind of other animal health concerns with trading kind of trade value, has made some pretty exciting times in the import-export market.
So as we're thinking about trade with our neighbors, how is that going, especially when we think about New World screwworm in Mexico?
Yeah, so if you remember that when we talked a little while ago, we were talking about how there was this big stop movement on feeder cattle coming in from Mexico. That was really going to affect placements into feed yards. We went from basically no cattle entering Mexico to now, as of last week, we are almost in line with our 5-year average, and last week's was exactly the number of head that we imported from Mexico was the same last week as it was a year prior. So this process that USDA has set up is really working effectively. We're able to really process cattle at the rate of commerce through the Mexican border, and in a way that is doing their best to safeguard the U.S. food industry. And so in that sense, we did see that shock. It did ripple through the cattle on feed reports for both the February and March reports. But, now I think we're back to normal, and that kind of shows that there's going to be an equilibrium, jostling out over the next couple of weeks when we think about trade and what that means. And there will be impacts on price, but there was already considerable downside in the market even prior to this when we think about just the pressure of beef prices on consumer demand and who was going to flinch. And now maybe consumers are being forced to flinch, due to some policy changes rather than personal preference.
Are our consumers going to continue to buy our beef?
I think that remains to be seen. Just like our consumers are feeling pressure from, disposable spending, other countries are also experiencing the same thing. I think we've shown that we produce a high value product. We export high quality steaks. We're importing a lot of the grounds in. And so I think the places that we've been able to see value, we'll continue to buy those. But, to what extent, there's a lot of debate in the trade literature about exactly this. What is the elasticity of demand for our trade partners? And so I think there's been some estimates out there, but with these new trade tariff measures, that's probably going to create some distortion. It is good to put in perspective just something like kind of where that value is going. We think about, we import a lot of stuff from Australia and grounds and from New Zealand. They're not a huge importer of our beef. And so there are some places that we're taking a lot of their value from, at least from the beef side, that maybe aren't being, quote, reciprocal in their total beef trade.
If someone's wanting to keep up to date with everything that's happening, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, I would say that there's a couple ways. Obviously, AgManager is a great place. Putting out stuff at cap.unl.edu, cap.unl.edu is a great place. I would primarily stay with extension and kind of commodity group analysis, primarily because they're trying to be objective about it and trying to show both sides of the picture of, like, yes, this could be damaging, but what are the potential benefits? I'm trying to steer a lot of producers that I talk to towards that, because you want to have as much unbiased opinion out there. We can all have our opinions, but the market's going to shake out the way it does. And it just seems like a lot of the commentary on the news media or even on just some professional websites have taken a slant that either they're pro-trade or anti-trade. And really some of the arguments have even kind of accused different administrations, so even political. So I say just staying away from those conversations and more trying to be objective about what is going to happen, what are the market impacts, and ultimately what does this mean as a manager of your operation? What are we doing to protect output price? There's a lot of uncertainty out there. So those tools and those ways of managing continue to be valid, even with or without, the issues with tariffs.
Elliott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
That was University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show talking about a few crop pests with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. My pleasure.
Jeff, you've received quite a few calls about Army cutworms and alfalfa weevils, and first discussing Army cutworms.
Sure. It's that time of year. It's early season, although this year it seems like the season's kind of been going on for a little while because of the warmth and the drought conditions we've undergone. But wheat and alfalfa are the two crops that finally seem like they're going pretty good. And the recent moisture we've gotten really has helped a lot for all these crops to outgrow any damage that may be out there because of the pests. The pests that we are seeing right now, the Army cutworm, as you just said, it is in alfalfa and it is in wheat. They are a moth, kind of a dusky colored cutworm moth, which means they're kind of heavy-bodied, husky-bodied, and they're very quick-moving. They're good flyers. The Army cutworm moths, they come out in probably mid to late May in Kansas, and you'll know that because we start getting calls or hearing on the news about the miller moths, especially around Wichita, Hutchinson, Garden City, Salina, in that area. But miller moths are adult Army cutworm moths. They start emerging from the pupa case. Like I said, every year is a little bit different based upon the weather, but mid to late May. They hang out for a week or two. They seem like they kind of get together. They don't really. The female moth will lay 1,000 to 2,000 eggs in the fall, so that's why there can be quite a few in any one place where winter survival is pretty good. So they're attracted to lights, and then as daylight comes, they often scurry away for some dark crack or crevice to get into. Lots of times that's under a door or in a window that's left partially down. And so they take off then around Memorial Weekend. They fly to the Rocky Mountains. They overwinter in the Rocky Mountains. We've been out looking for them and found them under rocks and limbs and trees and stuff like that. They're laying on the ground. They successfully over summer, those that do, they start back in late August, early September. They either have mated before they start back or they mate on their way back. When they get back to Kansas, they start depositing eggs. And each year they get about to, probably the 75 highway, 77 highway into Kansas. So they get maybe halfway through the western part of the state where they start, depositing eggs. Those eggs hatch in the fall. The reason they're on alfalfa or wheat, because those are the only green crops that are available for the larvae to eat. That's what they feed on. They'll actually feed on anything. They'll feed on trees, grasses, or weeds, but normally when the adult moths come back in the fall like that, the only agricultural crops we have are wheat and alfalfa. So they'll deposit their eggs, then those adults just die. They pass on in October or November again. Like I said, every year is a little different based upon the temperature. So those eggs are in the soil. They'll hatch within a month or two, and those small larvae will come out in December, January, and they'll start feeding on whatever crop's there. You don't notice it. The growers don't notice it at the time because they're really small. In wheat, they cause what we call window painting. In alfalfa, they'll cause little tiny pinprick type holes in the alfalfa. So if you're looking for them at that time of year, you really got to look. They'll be down in the soil. They're really small. The larvae are kind of nondescript, brown, dusky colored. But anytime the temperature's over 45, 50 degrees in the winter, they will feed a little bit. They're still active. They're just overwintering. So it depends on the winter. They can grow a little bit more or less, depending upon how many days we have over 45, 50 degrees in January, February, and March. And then they really start growing once the wheat or the alfalfa breaks dormancy. That's the same time that they come out of hibernation and start feeding voraciously. And so they'll feed for about a month. Right now, this time in April, the ones I've seen in the last week, they're about a quarter of an inch long. They're pretty small. They're a little easier to find because they're not as small as they were when they were first emerged from the egg, but they're still pretty small. So they're feeding. So you got most of the feeding to come now. As they get larger, they feed more. So if you're looking for army cutworms, get out now. And like I said, it's a blessing that we got moisture because a lot of times the alfalfa or the wheat can outgrow the damage caused by the army cutworm. Normally, if it's a thin stand of wheat, it takes only 1 or 2 per square foot to justify a treatment. If it's a good stand of wheat, it may take 4 to 8 army cutworms to justify treatment. We can control them, but you got to get out and look for them. Like I said, from now till mid-May, that's when they're going to do most of their growing and most of their feeding and most of their damage, and then they'll pupate and they'll start the cycle all over again.
What about a pest that growers would only be able to find in their alfalfa crop, the alfalfa weevil?
The alfalfa weevil is probably the pest that I dislike the most because they're only here for a short time, but they do a lot of damage in that short time. They're very difficult to control. They've started feeding in the last week, and the fields that I've looked at, I mean, there's a wide difference between infestation levels. Every field I've looked at in the last, let's say 2 weeks, I can find alfalfa weevil larvae. They're really pretty small right now, but I can still find them. I have not found a field that reached the treatment threshold. My treatment threshold is 30% to 50%, which means you got, 1 larva per 3 or 5 stems, or 2 stems, or 3 to 5 larvae per 10 stems, whatever. It depends on how you're getting out and sampling. That's my treatment threshold. My recommendation is once you hit that treatment threshold, irregardless of the time of year, you should treat because they're not going to go away. The other question I get, it's going to get down to 25, 30-degree temperatures at night. That's not going to bother them. It's not going to kill them. It's not even going to slow them down. They're cool weather insects. They do best, anytime the temperature's around 40 to 60 degrees. That's when they're the most active. They're going to do the most feeding damage, like the army cutworm we talked about, from now till, the end of April. As temperatures are 40 to 70 degrees, that's the ideal temperature for alfalfa weevil development. So they're going to do the most feeding. There's eggs still being deposited in stems. Those eggs are still going to hatch. There's eggs still in the stems to hatch. So that's why I say right now, if you hit the treatment threshold, whatever your treatment threshold is, and everybody has their own because, everybody uses alfalfa a little differently. Some people grow it for their own use, so they're a little more accepting of alfalfa weevil damage. Some want to sell it, so they don't want any damage at all. It just depends on what your treatment threshold is. Again, we use 30 to 50% infested, and we treat irregardless. And then after you treat, you want to go back, make sure you monitor it, whatever it is. Whatever compound you use, whatever insecticide you use, make sure you don't go back too soon. Always watch the reentry period for that product you're using. And then if you're getting ready to harvest, make sure you use the PHI or the post-harvest entry time also. You don't want to violate that. Anyway, the alfalfa weevils, in my opinion, the important part is timely spray and using enough gallonage. We did a study 2 years ago on gallonage where we used 4 gallons per 8 gallons per acre, and there was a visual difference. You could tell the difference just by looking at the field between the 4 and the 8. And then you got to control these pests while the wind's blowing 40 miles an hour and while it's raining and snowing. And that's why I say alfalfa weevils, the time of year when they're about, it's tough to try and control them. Get in the field, get adequate treatment, and get 90 to 95% control. We can do that. I get complaints all the time about the insecticide. Oh, we got resistance to this product. We got resistance to that product. We've done bioassays on most of these products that are currently registered, currently most widely used in the state. We've not found any resistance yet. I'm not saying there's not any out there, but we've not found any yet. So just remember, these products are not systemic. They have to come in contact with the insect, so therefore you want good coverage. Also remember, these products are only going to last 10 to 14 days. The alfalfa is putting on new foliage. You're going to have new eggs hatching. So that's why I say once you treat, you can't just walk away. You got to go back in, especially this early. You got to go back in 10 to 14 days or whatever the reentry period is for the product you use and keep monitoring because you may have to retreat again. But once they've emerged, it's only a first cutting problem. You don't have the problem for the second or the third or the fourth cutting. Alfalfa weevils are only here in the spring. They're only feeding for about 10 days to 12 days. Whether that 10 or 12-day period is spread out over a month because of the temperatures and because of the eggs hatching, each individual larvae only takes about 10 to 12 to 14 days to go from egg to pupa. So once you start seeing the white, cottony-looking cases out in your alfalfa field, whether they're on the ground or whether they're in the foliage, that means the pupal cases are there. The insect has quit feeding. The larvae are the only eating stage. I know adults will feed a little bit. Once you start seeing the white, cottony-looking pupal cases, that pretty much is indicative that the alfalfa weevil larval problem is winding down.
Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about pond moss with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, is pond moss algae?
Yeah, I get a lot of people calling and asking about saying they have pond moss in their pond, and really that is filamentous algae, right? And so it's just a local term that we're using. They're the same thing, and the management is going to be the same, but we're starting to see it show up now. We think about spraying all the new growth in the prairies that we have or on the trees, but also a lot of new growth occurring in our ponds. So I thought we would talk a little bit about this filamentous algae today.
What are some different types of algae people could be seeing in their pond?
Yeah, there's 3 main types of filamentous algae. They all kind of look the same, and treatment's going to be the same. But the one that shows up earliest is called Spirogyra, and it's bright green. It's really slimy if you pick it up, and so that's an easy way to identify that one. Pittophora is it's called horsehair algae. It's really long, and it feels really coarse, just like horsehair would. And then Cladophora is the most common filamentous algae that we see in Kansas, and if you pick that up, you can kind of squeeze it out like a cotton ball. If you rub it between your fingers, it kind of feels like cotton. So not a lot of people want to go get their hands on the slimy pond algae or pond moss that we're seeing, but that's how we would identify it if we went out to your pond.
Do people need to identify it in their pond?
Yeah, it's good to know what's going on, and different types of algae are going to show up for different reasons. So it's good information to have. It's always a first step that I would recommend, but you can start to manage the algae or the pond moss in your pond without identifying. Just knowing that it's filamentous algae is very important.
Are there other plants people could be seeing in their ponds?
Yeah, lots of different types of plants. So plants are broken down into four main groups. Algae is one of them. There is submerged vegetation, so plants that grow underwater all of the time. There is emergent vegetation, so we like to say that their roots are wet, but then the plant itself grows out of the water. And so we think of like a cattail that likes to have its roots in the water, and then most of the plant out of the water itself. That would be emergent vegetation. And then floating vegetation, which is vegetation that floats on the surface, like duckweed or watermeal. So identifying which type of plant you have is really important. Not necessarily the species, but what type is very important.
Is this valuable if we're thinking about pond as a closed system, of which it is?
Yeah, so ponds are closed systems, and that really means that, anything that we do in the system, it's not going to just go away. And so if we think about killing these plants with an herbicide, which is a lot of times what people want to do, that's great, and that is definitely a tool. But if we only use herbicide, those plants are going to die, they're going to sink to the bottom and decompose, and basically turn into compost for the seed bank that is down there. So you're going to see this cycle where the plants go away for a short period of time, and then those nutrients, once they're released, are picked up and they grow again. And so you have that constant cycle. If we only use herbicide, we're never going to break that cycle. So we need to introduce some other techniques, things like raking out some of the vegetation, using a parachute skimmer if it's floating vegetation, different techniques to make sure we get that plant matter out of the pond and those nutrients out of the pond so they can't just turn into fertilizer for some of the other seeds that we have in the pond.
As we're thinking about nutrients in the pond, also important time to mention livestock and ponds.
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of these ponds in Kansas are used for is raising livestock. Letting livestock get into your pond can be problematic. They can increase erosion rates, which can decrease the longevity of your pond. They can also add nutrients, right? And plants don't care where those nutrients come from. They don't care if they're fertilizer, they come naturally from a leaf, or if they come from a back end of a cow. And so those nutrients can lead to a lot of plant growth. Research has also consistently shown that if we pump the water out of the pond and fence off the pond, you get bigger daily growth rates for the livestock. So lots of benefits to not letting the livestock directly enter the pond.
If people are wanting to find out more information about plants or anything related to this, how can they do that? I'd
start by reaching out to your local extension agent, reaching out to myself if you have specific questions about your pond. We have a lot of good resources on our KSRE Wildlife Management YouTube page, including new videos on how to manage aquatic vegetation in your pond. So those are all some great resources.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. I will link their YouTube page in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.